The Gilded Crown restaurant blazed with the kind of light that only money could buy. Crystal chandeliers scattered diamonds across white tablecloths. A 20-foot Christmas tree stood guard near the entrance, its ornaments catching every flicker of candlelight. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's snow fell soft and silent, blanketing the city in white. Inside, the air hummed with laughter. Champagne glasses clinked. Men in tailored suits leaned close to women in designer gowns, their conversations a symphony of ambition and deals. But in the center of it all, an 8-year-old girl heard nothing. Rosalind Thornwood sat at the VIP table, her small hands wrapped around a worn stuffed bear. The bear's name was Whisper. Her father had given it to her 4 years ago, the last Christmas before he died. Around her mouth moved. Lips formed shapes she had learned to decode through years of practice. But tonight, with so many people talking at once, the shapes blurred into meaningless motion. Her hearing aids caught fragments of sound. Distant, distorted, painful. Not words, just noise. She looked at her mother. Seraphina Thornwood stood 3 feet away, shaking hands with a silver-haired man in a pinstripe suit. Sarah smiled the smile she saved for investors. Confident, controlled, perfect. Rosie signed with one hand, keeping Whisper tucked under her arm. "Mom," Sarah did not turn. "Mom, I want to go home." But her mother's eyes stayed fixed on the investor. Her lips moved rapidly, forming words Rosie could not quite catch. Something about quarterly projections, something about growth margins, nothing about the daughter sitting beside her. Rosie lowered her hand. She had learned over 8 years that her mother did not speak her language, and she had stopped expecting her to. Seraphina Thornwood had built her empire with words. She negotiated billion-dollar deals. She commanded boardrooms. She convinced the most skeptical investors to sign on dotted lines with nothing more than the power of her voice. But there was one conversation she had never won, the conversation with her own daughter. Because Rosie did not speak with sound. Rosie spoke with her hands. And in 8 years, Sarah had never learned how to listen. It was not cruelty. It was not neglect. It was something perhaps more painful than either. It was the quiet failure of a mother who loved her daughter deeply, but had never stopped long enough to meet her where she was. After Everett died, Sarah had poured herself into work. The company became her fortress. The boardroom became her sanctuary. And Rosie became the responsibility she managed rather than the child she knew. She hired the best therapists. She bought the most advanced hearing aids. She scheduled every appointment, met every benchmark, checked every box. But she never learned the one thing that would have mattered most. She never learned to speak with her hands. Bellamy Graves appeared at Sarah's elbow. 37 years old, sharp-featured, ambitious. The director of public relations carried a tablet and a carefully neutral expression. "In 15 minutes, we should move Rosie to a private room. She can have dinner there. It will be more comfortable for her." The words were framed as concern, but Sarah heard the subtext. Rosie was a variable, a risk, something to be managed. Sarah glanced at her daughter. Rosie sat motionless, her eyes distant, her arms wrapped around that tattered bear. "Fine. Have the staff prepare something for her." The words left her mouth before she could consider them. And by the time she thought to reconsider, Bellamy had already walked away. Sarah turned back to the investors. The smile returned to her face. The performance continued. And when she looked back 2 minutes later, Rosie's chair was empty. The girl had vanished into the crowd without a sound. Because for Rosie, Thornwood disappearing was easy. No one ever noticed her anyway. The service corridor stretched long and dim behind the kitchen. The noise from the restaurant faded into muffled vibrations through the walls. Here the air smelled of cleaning supplies and industrial metal. Staff members rushed past in white uniforms, too busy to notice a small girl in a velvet dress. Rosie pressed her back against the wall and hugged Whisper tight. Her hearing aids still buzzed with interference. The restaurant's sound system created frequencies that stabbed at her ears like needles. Out here in the quiet, the pain began to fade. She closed her eyes. "I'm here, Whisper. We're okay." She signed to the bear because there was no one else who would understand. A shadow fell across her. Rosie's eyes snapped open. A boy stood 3 feet away. He was older than her, maybe 10, with messy brown hair and kind eyes. He wore jeans and a sweatshirt, clearly not part of the elegant crowd in the dining room. He did not speak. Instead, he raised his hands and signed, "Hey, are you okay?" Rosie stared. In 8 years of her life, she could count on one hand the number of strangers who had signed to her. Teachers at her special school, therapists her mother hired, the interpreter who came to important events, but never a random boy in a service corridor on Christmas Eve. "You know, sign," she signed back, her hands trembling. The boy grinned. "My mom taught me. She was deaf too, but she's in heaven now." Something cracked inside Rosie's chest, a small fissure in the wall she had built around herself. "My dad is in heaven too." The boy's smile softened. He sat down on an equipment crate and patted the space beside him. "I'm Finn. What's your name, Rosalind?" "But everyone calls me Rosie." Finn reached into his pocket and produced a candy cane, slightly bent, but still wrapped. "Want one? I brought extra." Rosie sat down beside him. She took the candy cane, and for the first time all evening, she smiled. Callahan Brennan was not supposed to be working on Christmas Eve. 3 years ago, he had been a sound engineer at one of Manhattan's top recording studios. He had a wife named Marisol, a son named Finn, and a life that made sense. Then Marisol's heart stopped. Sudden cardiac arrest. No warning. No goodbye. One moment she was laughing at something Finn said, and the next she was gone. Cal had quit his job within the month. The studio held too many memories. Every soundboard reminded him of her voice. Every recording booth echoed with her silence. Now he worked maintenance, contract jobs, flexible hours. Enough time to be home when Finn needed him. Enough money to keep the lights on. He had brought Finn tonight because the daycare was closed for the holiday. The boy sat on a crate in the back hallway, coloring Christmas pictures while Cal fixed a faulty electrical panel. When Cal heard voices, he looked up. Finn was sitting with a little girl in an expensive dress. They were signing rapidly, their hands dancing through the air. The girl clutched a stuffed bear and laughed at something Finn said. Cal set down his tools and approached slowly. Marisol had been deaf from birth. She had taught Cal and Finn to sign before Finn could even walk. For their family, ASL was not a second language. It was their first. And now, watching Finn communicate effortlessly with this stranger, Cal felt Marisol's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. The girl noticed him. Her laughter stopped. She pressed back against the wall, suddenly wary. Cal knelt down to her level. He signed slowly, clearly. "It's okay. I'm Finn's dad. Are you lost?" The girl's eyes widened. She looked between Cal and Finn as if confirming that, yes, there were two people in the world who could understand her. "My mom is in the restaurant, but she doesn't know sign." The words hit Cal harder than they should have. A mother who couldn't communicate with her own child. A daughter trapped in silence even when surrounded by people. He thought of Marisol. He thought of all the nights they had stayed up late, signing in the dark, because she could not hear whispers. He thought of how deeply he had loved learning her language, how it had become as natural as breathing. And he wondered how any parent could go 8 years without learning to speak to their own child. The door at the end of the corridor burst open. A woman strode through. Late 30s, black designer dress, the kind of presence that demanded attention. Her face was tight with barely controlled panic. "Rosie." The girl stood up quickly. She signed something rapid, but the woman did not seem to understand. "Rosie, what are you doing back here? Who are these people?" The woman's voice was sharp, worried, but also something else. Frustrated. Cal rose to his feet. "I'm the maintenance contractor. Your daughter seemed upset, so my son and I were keeping her company." The woman's eyes flicked to Cal's work uniform. The judgment was brief but unmistakable. Keeping her company, Rosie signed again, more insistently. "Mom, they can talk to me, like Dad used to." But Sarah did not understand. She saw her daughter's hands moving and felt the familiar pang of failure, the guilt she had buried under years of work and denial. "Rosie, we need to go back to the table. Prescott Kensington is waiting." She reached for Rosie's hand. Rosie pulled back. "I want to stay with Finn." Sarah blinked. She didn't understand the sign, but she understood her daughter's body language, the defiance, the hurt. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Sarah, is there a problem?" Corwin Ashworth emerged from the shadows, like a man who had been waiting for the right moment. 55 years old, silver gray hair, a face that had learned to hide its true intentions behind decades of boardroom politics. He had been Everett Thornwood's best friend. After Everett died, Corwin had stepped in to help Sarah keep the company together, or so she believed. No problem. Rosie just wandered off. Corwin's gaze swept over Cal and Finn. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Something cold. The maintenance staff should focus on their work. The VIP area requires discretion. Cal said nothing, but he filed away the look Corwin gave him. It was not the look of a man annoyed by a minor disruption. It was the look of a man who had something to hide. Corwin guided Sarah and Rosie back toward the restaurant, but at the doorway he paused. He turned. He looked directly at Cal. "Stay in your lane tonight, for your own sake." Then he was gone. Finn tugged on Cal's sleeve. "Dad, that man looked at us weird." Cal nodded slowly. "Yeah, he did." The dinner resumed, but something had shifted. Rosie sat beside her mother, but her eyes kept drifting toward the service corridor, toward Finn, toward the first real conversation she'd had in months. Sarah noticed but did not understand. She tried to focus on Prescott Kensington. The legendary investor sat across from her, his sharp eyes missing nothing. At 65, he had seen every trick in the book. He did not invest in desperation. He invested in strength. Sarah needed his money. The company was hemorrhaging cash after a series of bad deals. Deals that Corwin had assured her would pay off. They hadn't. Now Thornwood Capital stood on the edge of collapse. Tonight's dinner was her last chance. The chandeliers flickered. A low hum vibrated through the speakers, then static, then a high-pitched whine that made everyone wince. Rosie gasped. Her hearing aids caught the interference at maximum amplification. The frequency stabbed into her ears like ice picks. She pressed her hands against her head, her face contorting in pain. Sarah spun around. "Rosie, Rosie, what's wrong?" But Rosie couldn't hear her. Rosie couldn't hear anything except the screaming static that filled her skull. Cal was already moving. He had heard the feedback loop the moment it started. Years of sound engineering had trained his ears to detect problems before they became disasters. He ran to the utility room, threw open the electrical panel, and found exactly what he expected. Someone had cut the wires, deliberately, precisely, just enough to cause a failure under load without triggering a complete blackout. This was sabotage. Cal worked fast. He bypassed the damaged connections, isolated the feedback loop, and rerouted the signal through a backup system. Within 3 minutes, the speakers fell silent. The light stabilized. But as he gathered the cut wires as evidence, something caught his eye. Through the cracked door, he could see Corwin Ashworth standing in a dark corner of the hallway. A server approached him and handed over a small object, a USB drive. Corwin slipped it into his pocket and walked away without a word. Cal did not know what was on that drive, but he knew with absolute certainty that Corwin Ashworth was not what he appeared to be. Back in the dining room, the crisis had passed. Rosie sat quietly, her hands still pressed over her ears, even though the noise had stopped. The pain had faded, but the fear remained. Cal approached carefully. He knelt beside her and signed. "It's okay now. I fixed it. The noise won't come back. Rosie lowered her hands. She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Thank you. Cal smiled gently. Your hearing aids are sensitive to certain frequencies. Let me adjust them. He had done this 1,000 times for Marisol. His fingers moved with practiced precision, adjusting the settings on Rosie's hearing aids until the world became bearable again. Sarah watched in silence. She watched this stranger, this maintenance worker in worn clothes, communicate with her daughter more easily than she ever had. She watched him understand what Rosie needed without being told. She watched him provide comfort that Rosie's own mother did not know how to give, and she felt something break inside her. 8 years. 8 years of loving Rosie from a distance. 8 years of providing everything except the one thing that mattered, herself. How do you know how to do that? The question came out softer than Sarah intended. Cal looked up. My wife was deaf. She taught me. Was she passed away 3 years ago? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry. Cal nodded. Then he said something that cut deeper than he intended. Your daughter is brilliant. She has so much to say. She just needs someone who knows how to listen. Sarah felt the words like a knife between her ribs, because he was right. Bellamy rushed over, tablet in hand. Sarah, we have a problem. The USB drive with the financial presentation is missing. I had it in my jacket pocket and now it's gone. Corwin appeared beside her, his expression grave. We should search all non-essential personnel, starting with the maintenance staff. He looked directly at Cal. That man was in the utility room alone. He had access to the entire back area. Security moved toward Cal. Finn stepped in front of his father, small fists clenched. Rosie watched her heart pounding. She understood what was happening. The bad man was blaming Cal. The bad man was trying to hurt her friend. She stood up. She walked to the center of the room, and she signed. Her hands moved with desperate clarity. She told them everything. She told them how Cal had helped her when she was scared. She told them how Finn had made her laugh. She told them that these people were good, that they would never steal anything. But the investors just stared. They saw a child making strange gestures. They saw a disruption to their important dinner. They saw a problem, not a person. A problem. Corwin smiled. Unfortunately, no one here understands what the girl is trying to say. A chair scraped against the floor. Prescott Kensington rose to his feet. The legendary investor walked slowly across the room until he stood directly before Rosie. Then he knelt down, and he signed. Tell me what happened, little one. I'm listening. The room went absolutely silent. Sarah stared. Corwin's smile vanished. Rosie's eyes went wide, then filled with tears, then spilled over with hope. She signed everything, every detail, every moment. The way Cal had fixed her hearing aids, the way Finn had shared his candy cane, the way Corwin had looked at them with cold eyes and told Cal to stay in his lane. Prescott listened. His face remained impassive, but his eyes grew darker with each revelation. When Rosie finished, he stood. My granddaughter is deaf. I learned ASL 15 years ago because I refused to let a language barrier separate me from the people I love. He looked at Sarah. This child just told me that the maintenance worker helped her when no one else did. She told me he fixed the sound system that was causing her pain. She told me he is a good man. His gaze shifted to Corwin. She also told me that your CFO threatened him in the hallway. Corwin's composure cracked. Just for a moment. Just enough. Children misunderstand things. She probably misheard. Prescott's voice went cold. She's deaf, Corwin. She doesn't mishear. She sees. And children see more than adults want to believe. Sarah felt something shifting. Tectonic plates beneath her feet. The ground she had stood on for 4 years beginning to fracture. She looked at Corwin, at the man who had been Everett's best friend, at the man who had held her hand at the funeral, at the man who had guided her through the worst years of her life. and she saw for the first time a stranger wearing a familiar face. Corwin guided Sarah into the service corridor, away from the investors, away from witnesses. "We need to talk privately." His voice was calm, too calm. Sarah folded her arms. "What's going on, Corwin? Why did you threaten the maintenance worker? I was protecting you, protecting the company. These people are outsiders. They don't belong here. That doesn't explain the sabotage. Someone cut the electrical wires deliberately. Someone caused that feedback that hurt my daughter." Corwin's mask slipped again. His jaw tightened. "You're making accusations without evidence. Then explain this." Sarah pulled out her phone. "I saw you in the hallway, talking to a server. He gave you a USB drive, the same drive that went missing from Bellamy's pocket." Corwin was silent. The silence stretched. Then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You always were too smart for your own good, Sarah." Just like Everett, the name hit her like a physical blow. "What does Everett have to do with this?" Corwin took a step closer. Everett was going to destroy everything. 4 years ago, he discovered inconsistencies in the Harrington deal. He realized I had been skimming funds, hiding losses, cooking the books. Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her. He was going to turn me in, to the SEC, to the board, to everyone. Her voice came out as a whisper, and I couldn't let that happen. Corwin's eyes were empty, the eyes of a man who had made peace with his sins long ago. His heart medication. I switched the dosage, just enough to trigger an arrhythmia. The doctors called it sudden cardiac arrest. Very tragic, very natural. Sarah couldn't breathe. "You killed him. I protected myself. I protected the company, and I've been protecting you ever since." He leaned in close. "Every document you've signed in the last 4 years has my fingerprints on it. If I go down, you go down with me. So I suggest you go back to that dining room, smile at Prescott Kensington, and forget this conversation ever happened." Sarah stood frozen. The world had collapsed around her. The man she had trusted, the friend who had dried her tears, the mentor who had guided her through grief. He had murdered her husband. She didn't notice the small shadow in the doorway. She didn't see Rosie watching. She didn't know that her daughter, who could not hear, had been reading lips since she was 5 years old. And Rosie had understood every word. Rosie ran. Her velvet shoes made no sound on the marble floors. Her heart hammered in her chest. Tears streamed down her face. "He killed Daddy." The words echoed in her mind like a scream she couldn't release. "He killed Daddy, and Mommy doesn't know I know." She found Finn in the service corridor. He took one look at her face and signed urgently. "What happened? What's wrong?" Rosie's hands shook so badly she could barely form the words. "The bad man. He killed my daddy. He just told my mom." Finn's eyes went wide. "We have to tell my dad." They found Cal by the electrical panel, still gathering evidence. Rosie signed everything. Her hands flew through the air, spelling out murder and medicine, and the cold smile on Corwin's face. Cal listened. His expression grew darker with each word. "Your mom knows now," Rosie nodded. "But the bad man said, if he goes down, Mommy goes down too. He's making her stay quiet." Cal looked at the cut wires in his hand, at the camera footage on the security monitor, at the 2 children who trusted him to make things right. He had spent 3 years trying to be invisible, trying to survive, trying to raise his son without drawing attention from a world that had already taken too much from him. But some things were worth fighting for. "Come with me. We're going to fix this." Cal found Prescott Kensington waiting in the hallway. The old investor stood alone, his phone in his hand, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Kensington, I need 5 minutes." Prescott looked at him, then at the children behind him, the maintenance worker, the one Corwin wanted searched. "Yes, sir. And I have something you need to see." Cal showed him the cut wires. He showed him the security footage of Corwin receiving the USB from the server. He told him what Rosie had witnessed in the corridor. Prescott listened without interruption. When Cal finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. Corwin Ashworth has been on my radar for years. Small inconsistencies, unexplained losses, partners who disappeared after doing business with him, but I never had proof. He looked at Rosie. Until now. The VIP dining room fell silent as Prescott walked to the center. Before we proceed with any investment discussions, I want to share something with everyone present. He gestured to the large screen used for presentations. I believe we should review the security footage from this evening. Corwin's face went pale. That's hardly necessary. The footage began to play. Everyone watched as Corwin met with the server in the dark hallway, as the USB changed hands, as the same server was caught on camera near Bellamy's coat slipping something into her pocket. The evidence was damning, but it was not the worst, because Sarah had been recording. Her phone clutched in her hand during the confrontation had captured everything. The confession, the murder, the threats. She had not planned it. She had simply forgotten to hang up the call she'd made to her lawyer before the dinner. And now as she walked into the room and pressed play, Corwin's own voice condemned him. His heart medication. I switched the dosage, just enough to trigger an arrhythmia. The investors recoiled. Board members stared in horror. Bellamy covered her mouth with her hand. Corwin lunged towards Sarah, but Cal was faster. He stepped between them, his body a wall protecting mother and daughter. You've taken enough from this family. It ends now. The doors opened. FBI agents streamed into the room. Prescott had made the call 20 minutes ago. A former federal prosecutor, he still had friends in high places. Corwin Ashworth, you are under arrest for first-degree murder conspiracy, embezzlement, and fraud. Handcuffs clicked around Corwin's wrists. The man who had killed Everett Thornwood, who had manipulated his widow who had threatened a child, was led away in front of everyone he had ever deceived. Justice for once was not delayed. Rosie stood beside Cal, watching Corwin disappear through the door. She signed a whisper. We got him. Daddy, we got him. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned. Her mother stood behind her. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Her hands trembled. And then slowly, clumsily, Sarah raised her hands. She signed, I love you. The signs were wrong. Her fingers fumbled. The grammar was broken, but Rosie understood. For the first time in 8 years, her mother was trying. Rosie reached up and gently corrected Sarah's finger positions. She guided her hands through the proper motion. Like this, Mom. Sarah laughed through her tears. I have so much to learn. Then learn. I'll teach you. They stood there, mother and daughter, finally speaking the same language. The room had emptied. Investors had gone home to process what they had witnessed. Board members huddled with lawyers. Staff cleaned up the remnants of a dinner that had become a crime scene. Only 4 people remained. Sarah sat on a velvet bench, Rosie pressed against her side. Cal stood near the window, Finn leaning against his leg. The snow had stopped falling. Manhattan glittered beyond the glass, a city of lights and silence. I don't know how to thank you. Sarah's voice was raw, broken, real. Cal shook his head. You don't need to thank me. You needed the truth. Your daughter deserved justice. Sarah looked at Rosie, really looked at her. Not as a schedule to manage, not as a problem to solve, but as a person. She has been so lonely, and I never saw it. Cal sat down across from them. My wife used to say that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about presence, about showing up, about learning someone's language even when it's hard. Rosie reached into whisper and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Sarah frowned. What is that Rosie signed to Cal? Cal translated. Her father wrote her a letter. Before he died, she's been keeping it hidden in the bear. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Rosie unfolded the paper and handed it to her mother. Sarah read, "My dearest Rosie, if you are reading this, I am no longer with you. I wish I could have stayed longer. I wish I could have watched you grow up, seen you graduate, walked you down the aisle someday. But if I can give you one gift from beyond, let it be this. Please give this letter to your mother when she is ready. Tell her that I need her to learn sign language. Tell her that you don't need her to be perfect. You just need her to be present. Rosie, you have the most beautiful voice I have ever seen. Your hands speak poetry. Your silence is not emptiness. It is music that only those who truly look can hear. Never stop speaking. Never stop signing. Never let anyone make you feel invisible. And tell your mother I forgive her for being busy. I forgive her for being scared. But I need her to forgive herself too. I need her to put down her phone, step out of the boardroom and sit with you. Really sit with you. That is all you ever needed. That is all any of us ever need. To be seen. I love you to the moon and back. Forever your father, Everett." Sarah wept, deep shaking sobs that released 4 years of guilt, 4 years of denial, 4 years of loving her daughter from a distance because the closeness was too painful after losing Everett. She gathered Rosie into her arms. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have learned years ago. I should have been there." Rosie signed against her mother's shoulder. "You're here now, and sometimes now is all that matters." The months that followed that Christmas Eve were not easy. Sarah had to rebuild everything: her company, her reputation, her relationship with her daughter. The investigation into Corwin's crimes revealed a web of corruption that stretched back a decade: embezzlement, fraud. The deaths of two other business partners, both ruled accidental, now reopened as potential homicides. Thornwood Capital nearly collapsed under the weight of scandal. Investors fled. Stock prices plummeted. Financial analysts predicted bankruptcy within 6 months. But Sarah refused to let her husband's legacy die. She fought. She restructured. She was transparent in ways that corporations rarely are: admitting failures, accepting responsibility, promising to be better. And slowly, painfully, the company began to heal. Prescott Kensington had invested after all, not because of the financials, not because of the projections, but because he said he had seen something rare that Christmas Eve. He had seen a woman choose her daughter over her empire. That kind of integrity, he told reporters, cannot be purchased. It can only be earned. Cal became a permanent fixture in their lives. At first, he came over to help Rosie with her schoolwork, translating the lessons Sarah was still learning to deliver. Then he stayed for dinner. Then he stayed for conversations that stretched late into the night. Finn and Rosie became inseparable, brother and sister in everything but blood. They signed to each other, constantly developing their own shorthand, their own jokes, their own private language within the language. When Cal proposed, he did it in sign. Sarah cried, Rosie cried. Even Finn wiped his eyes, though he insisted later that he just had something in them. They were married in the spring in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. Rosie served as flower girl and translator, signing the vows for everyone to see. That day, Sarah understood what her husband had meant in his letter. Presence. That was all it took. Simply showing up. Simply staying. Simply choosing to be there even when it was hard. 1 year later, the gilded crown looked different. Gone were the crystal chandeliers. Gone were the designer gowns. The restaurant had been remodeled, softened, transformed into something warmer. It was Christmas Eve again. A table near the window held 4 place settings. Candles flickered in the afternoon light. Snow fell gently beyond the glass. Seraphina Thornwood sat at the head of the table. But she was not the same woman who had walked into this room a year ago. Her designer dress had been replaced by a simple sweater. Her severe hairstyle had relaxed into soft waves. And on her left hand beside her wedding ring sat a new band of silver. A gift from Callahan Brennan, given 6 months ago. accepted without hesitation. Across from her sat Cal, his work-worn hands wrapped around a coffee cup. He looked at Sarah with the quiet adoration of a man who had learned to love again after believing he never would. Beside them, Finn and Rosie argued about dessert. "I'm just saying Finn's signed chocolate cake is objectively better than apple pie." "You're wrong and I can prove it. Scientifically," Rosie signed back. Sarah laughed. She signed smoothly now. Not perfectly, but fluently. She had taken classes 3 nights a week for a year. She had practiced every morning before work. She had watched videos, read books, and asked Rosie to correct her constantly. It had been hard. It had been humbling. It had been worth every moment. She looked around the table. At Finn, who called her Sarah now, but sometimes slipped and said Mom. At Cal, whose steady presence had taught her that strength didn't mean doing everything alone. At Rosie, who had blossomed in ways Sarah never imagined possible. Her daughter was 9 now, still small for her age, still clutching Whisper in quiet moments. But there was light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The light of a child who knew she was seen. Rosie pulled Whisper from beside her chair. "Whisper wants to say something." She positioned the bear on the table, then signed as if translating. "Whisper says Daddy is watching us from heaven. He's very proud of Mom for learning to listen, and he's happy we found our family." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. The good kind, the healing kind. Cal reached across the table and took her hand. He signed one-handed, a phrase Marisol had taught him long ago. Family isn't about blood. Family is about who shows up. Rosie added her own hand to the pile. Then Finn, 4 hands, 2 families, 1 home. And in that moment, Sarah understood what Everett had been trying to tell her. Love is not a destination. It is a language, a daily practice, a choice made over and over again. For 8 years, she had loved Rosie in a language her daughter could not understand. Now finally they were fluent. The candles flickered. Snow fell soft against the window. Rosie looked out at the falling snow. She signed to no one in particular. "I think this is the best Christmas ever." Sarah reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "I think so too." Rosie hugged Whisper close. Then she signed to the ceiling, to the stars, to wherever her father might be watching. "Thank you, Daddy, for sending them to us." Cal squeezed Sarah's hand. Finn bumped shoulders with Rosie, and in the warm glow of Christmas Eve, 4 people who had once been strangers sat together as a family. Not a perfect family, not a family without scars, but a family that had chosen each other, a family that had learned to speak the same language, a family that understood the most important truth of all. Love is not about hearing every word. It is about seeing every heart. Somewhere beyond the snow and the stars and the silence, 2 people smiled. Everett, who had written a letter hoping his wife would learn to listen. Marisol, who had taught her husband and son to speak with their hands. Their legacies lived on, not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the small moments, the signed conversations, the quiet understanding between people who had learned that presence matters more than perfection. The candles burned low, the snow kept falling, and Rosie Thornwood, who had spent 8 years feeling invisible, finally knew what it meant to be seen. 6 months later, Bellamy Graves testified against Corwin at trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, phone recordings, financial documents that traced a decade of fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Corwin Ashworth received 3 consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole. He would die in prison, surrounded by the kind of silence he had once weaponized against others. Sarah attended every day of the trial. She sat in the front row, Rosie beside her, their hands intertwined. She needed to see it end. She needed to watch the man who murdered her husband face justice. When the verdict was read, she did not cheer. She did not cry. She simply signed to her daughter. "It's over now. Daddy can rest." Rosie signed back. "He's proud of us, Mom. I know he is. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, Sarah believed her.